It was early in the morning on the Henry Hudson Parkway, and a couple of construction workers were walking down the road.
You know, people are going about their normal lives, and suddenly one of the road workers noticed this horrible odor. He probably figured somebody had just discarded something, and something had rotted.
Oh my God.
I'm sure he would have never imagined the true horror that was inside that cooler.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
When the cops in the 34th precinct were called to a possible homicide, so they assumed that it was going to be a regular day. And then they found out very quickly that it was going to be anything but.
In that cooler was the remains of a young female child.
It is just the most disturbing crime you can come across.
I looked over the side of the rail and I seen a cooler.
We tipped it over. A bunch of soda cans fell out, Coke cans, and then a bag. Opened the bag up and saw a body.
Where you can't recognize the human body, the smell, the bloating, and just the decay of the flesh. They described it as just horrific.
It was like this precious little girl had been ditched on the side of the road like rubbish. It must have been very clear to the police that the person responsible for this was a monster and a danger to the community, and that they had to find this killer.
But first, investigators needed to find out who she was.
It was so important to try and identify her so that we could find the killer because she was so young and she was so small. You think it's a baby, but we didn't know her age at the time.
Detectives canvassed the grounds to look for evidence, but there was nothing found.
But investigators didn't give up. I mean, they pulled out all of the stops to try to get to the bottom of this.
There you go, ma'am. Investigating a homicide.
We literally had Crime Stopper vans driving through neighborhoods from 155th Street to 217th Street with the megaphones on top, you know, looking for witnesses to try and find out who that person was.
But they turned up empty-handed. They found nothing.
And that's when they called us at the Post.
The New York Post ran a story urging the public to help them try and identify this mystery girl who was discovered.
When we put the story out there, New Yorkers reacted with horror. This is something that really got people where they lived. So while the police searched for leads, the child's body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy.
In terms of the emotional aspect, the death of any child is extremely difficult. And this was horrific. She was a small child and she was badly decomposed. long hair. She had a hair tie with some yellow baubles on it. Her body had been folded in half, and rope was tied around her neck and around her calves to keep the body folded over. We classified her as Hispanic. We identified her as being approximately 4 years old on the basis of her dentition, her teeth, and the age of her bones in her body.
And the medical examiner confirmed that this little girl was 3 feet 2 inches tall and severely malnourished, weighed, when alive, approximately 25 pounds.
It was clearly a homicide. And I felt most likely the cause of death, the way she was killed, was by asphyxia, smothering.
The autopsy results showed that what this girl went through in her final days was horrendous. And it only got worse.
As the examination went on, we did swabs and we later identified semen in her genitals. And this is a child who'd had sexual contact with a mature male. It was repellent.
It's just so difficult to comprehend that somebody could commit such a monstrous act against a child that's that young and that defenseless and that helpless and that innocent.
I have children. And what's to say that couldn't be your child?
It's one thing when an adult is victimized, but it's another thing when it's a small child. And that's why this case weighed so heavy on everyone. And that just kind of makes you have more of a drive to try to get an arrest.
To the NYPD. This certainly strengthened their resolve and made it almost like a mission to them.
First things that the detectives did was check the database to see if a missing child had been reported.
There was no child at that time fitting her description and her age reported missing.
It's just really perplexing why this little girl goes missing and nobody came forward, not the family, not neighbors. Nobody seems to notice that this young girl has just vanished into thin air.
It may be that nobody else was seeking justice for her. That really hit home for the detectives. And it really gave the sense that perhaps they felt they needed to step up where no one else would.
The precinct became her family. And we wanted to give some dignity to her.
So they named her and called her Baby Hope, because at that point, that's all they had, was hope that they would be able to bring her killer to justice.
The name, it somehow kept her alive.
One of the most challenging parts of this case were there were no pictures of Baby Hope. They didn't know what she looked like. They couldn't, put her photo out there to try and get the community's help.
So a forensic anthropologist was used to establish a facial recognition of that child based on her bone structure.
And for the detectives, this is really the first time that they got to see what Baby Hope would have looked like, which, of course, humanized her and made her a person as opposed to just an idea of something horrible that had happened.
You can still see the picture, you don't forget it. She just looked like your small, average, everyday child, you know?
The police sent this sketch to the New York Post. And so the Post published this picture of her. And that really elicited a ton of responses from the public.
You just hope that was the information that the media puts out there, that someone will know something.
Somebody always sees something. There's always somebody looking out a window. Nothing that's done and kept secret will remain a secret. The truth will always come out.
After a child mysteriously turned up dead, both the police and the public were desperate to find out what had happened. From the outset, the Post was all over this story, providing details to readers about the child that the police had named Baby Hope to inform them and hopefully get some answers. And it worked.
A witness came forward with a tip that she thought was related to the case after reading the story in the newspaper.
She said on a Sunday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, while her and her husband were traveling south on the Honey Hudson Parkway, they saw a man and a woman carrying a cooler.
They were a well-dressed Hispanic couple, but they could not see their faces.
It's not normal to see a man and a woman carrying a cooler along the side of a highway. Where was the car parked that they carried the cooler from?
And the witness seemed credible. They didn't appear to have any ulterior motive. They weren't asking for a reward. She was so certain of what she had seen that cops believed her, and they felt certain that they had a really solid lead to go on.
You have a man and a woman, so what's the relation between those two adults and that child?
They could surmise potentially that there was some relationship there, but that's really all that they had to go on. So what the detectives had to do was use what little they had, the fact that Baby Hope had been sexually abused. They were thinking maybe this is a father, or maybe this is a male guardian of some sort, or maybe a mother's boyfriend. And there's always the possibility that the killer was being protected by a family member.
Why didn't we have a family in the lobby of the precinct saying, "Where is she? We can't find her"? It was like someone was hiding something, but why?
There was the open question of whether there was a predator here. So not only if this could happen again, but when.
There was a real feeling of urgency to this case. And once again, the police canvassed the neighborhood, but this time they're trying to identify these two people. But there was a problem. The witness didn't have any really in-depth details about what they look like. A Hispanic man and woman. It's this vague description that could match hundreds of thousands of people in New York City.
We didn't have anything further to go on, so we didn't have anything to follow up on other than what she saw.
They set up a tip hotline with a $12,000 reward just to try and track down anything that can bring the case forward.
Unfortunately, despite the efforts of the police for a second time, they didn't get any new information. Police knew that every second counted to find Baby Hope's killer. other children could be in danger. So unfortunately, those fears became reality.
Photos were found at a photo development store, and they depict really sick images of a man with a little girl.
It was clear that they were pictures of a crime.
So police either had visual evidence of what had happened to Baby Hope, or another little girl was in terrible danger. Police were in a race against the clock to find Baby Hope's killer when they were presented with some truly terrifying physical evidence.
Photos were found at a photo development store that was nearby of an older man with a very, very young girl. And this girl had features similar to Baby Hope, and it was child pornography.
Hi, this is Detective Resnick. Can I speak to someone in the photo lab department, please?
So because of the nature of those pictures, the store owner at this place where the film was developed notified the police of what he saw.
Police were able to get the man's address from the photo development store.
They interrogated him.
And then he confessed to a truly horrible crime, but not the one that they were expecting.
It turned out that he was the grandfather who had taken these images with his granddaughter. They were able to bring charges against this man, and detectives essentially saved another little girl.
So the good news is that there was one more predator off the streets, but Baby Hope's killer was still out there. So the New York Post ran the story again.
For the New York Post readers, they felt the frustration that the person who committed this horrific crime was still out there, and that this little girl did not have justice.
Unfortunately, the leads really still weren't going anywhere. And for the cops who took this case so personally, this was getting devastating. In an unexpected way, Baby Hope had sort of become a family member to these detectives. And they did for her what her own family could not.
They decided to use their own money to give this little girl a proper burial.
One of the detectives actually gave their child's own communion gown, and they laid it on top of her in her casket.
It's a somber day, a very somber day. I remember just looking at the coffin because, you know, it's going to close. And that's it.
Hundreds of people showed up for this, and people who didn't know who she was, but they felt connected to her.
A little girl now has 5 years old, and she died. I don't know why they killed her.
Besides the fact that this child was so brutally tortured and everything else, no one came to claim her. You know, we feel that it's necessary to be here for her.
Baby Hope had become New York's baby.
These people thought enough to take time out of their day to go and celebrate the life she didn't have.
After the funeral, she was taken to a cemetery where she was buried. We paid for a headstone and had it engraved because we care. To let her know and anybody else know that there was no detective in the 3-4 precinct who was ever going to put this away.
Unfortunately, one of the saddest parts of once she was buried, the leads pretty much dried up. And 16 years went by. But as the years passed, so did advances in forensic science.
After the World Trade Center disaster in 2001, we had so much drive to try and identify the victims of 9/11 that my office began to develop new techniques. And each year they would be able to advance the science and of identification to help us identify more and more people.
Because of the efforts of the medical examiner's office, cold cases were starting to get solved. So Baby Hope's remains were exhumed for DNA testing.
We took a bone sample. The hope was that if we had a good DNA profile, our chances of finding someone related to her would increase.
This was a very difficult process because there was very little bone material that was usable because of the advanced, deterioration of her remains.
With a little bit of luck, we're actually able to get a usable profile from the bone sample.
They finally had a DNA profile of Baby Hope. Now they just needed a match. So they ran it through all the existing databases of missing persons throughout the country, hoping that they were going to find something. The DNA tests took weeks to process. You've got to imagine the anticipation. I mean, this was it. They'd been waiting for this. Unfortunately, they came up empty. They got no hits. But it wasn't as if everything was lost, because now they at least had a DNA profile, which meant there was a potential that they would be able to match it to a family member at some point in the future.
Every year, it just made sure that the media always kept her memory, her face out there trying to get leads, trying to get a resolution.
And on the 22nd anniversary of Baby Hope's death, they finally got a tip.
NYPD.
I was working in Crime Stoppers, and I got a call.
Yes, how may I help you?
Caller said that she saw the news and she thought she had information about this child.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, tell me what you got.
She remembers a conversation she'd overheard a few years before. She's at a laundromat where a young woman said to a friend that she had a little sister who vanished, and she believed that she may have been murdered.
And that she saw the baby in the refrigerator in a plastic bag dead, which was then later removed and put in a cooler.
Can I get your name, please?
I knew that what she was saying had to be valid because there was just so much detailed information.
Okay, great. I will meet you there. Thank you so much.
Detectives went to the laundromat, and it turned out that the woman who had engaged in this conversation was the niece of the laundromat owner.
Her name was Laurencita, and investigators were able to get her address from the owner of the laundromat.
So they tracked down Laurencita to Sunset Park, where she shares an apartment with her husband.
So they got there, and they really didn't know what to expect. She answered the door.
Help you?
And it was like looking at a ghost. A sketch of Baby Hope. This was her face, but it was on the face of a grown woman. So after 22 years of working the case, detectives were finally face to face with a woman who might be Baby Hope's relative. This was uncanny. The woman looked like Baby Hope, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. It was like Baby Hope come to life 20 some odd years later.
I'm just following up with you on a cold case. It's about a little...
Her name was Laurencita. She had grown up in the Bronx, the daughter of Mexican immigrants. And she told the cops that when she was around 11 years old, she had been reunited with a sister named Maribel. And her sister Maribel told Laurencita that she had overheard that they had another sister whose name she didn't know, but that something bad had happened to her. So when Laurencita saw these pictures that the police had of Baby Hope, she knew in her heart that this little girl was probably her sister.
Who was caring for her at that time?
And whatever dark secret her family was harboring, Laurencita knew that it had to come to light, and she was willing to work with authorities to make that happen. Now, this was immensely helpful, but it was by no means ironclad. This was limited information, and it was also secondhand, but it was a lead. Police also had Baby Hope's DNA profile, but for that, a sibling isn't going to help. You need the parents' DNA profile. So to confirm if Baby Hope was her sister, the cops asked Laurencita where her parents were, and it turned out that her mother, Margarita Castillo, was living in Queens, not that far away.
Yes?
Margarita, right?
See?
Hi, I'm Detective Resnick, NYPD. I was just hoping to ask you a few questions about a case that we might have recently had a break.
They try and talk to her about Baby Hope.
No, I don't know anything.
Please, it'll just take a few minutes.
No.
She was very evasive, not very cooperative. She doesn't want to get involved.
No, I can't help you.
Please,
Sorry.
it'll just...
But remember, they had a DNA profile of Baby Hope. So from there, they were able to get an envelope with Margarita's saliva on it, and then they were able to compare against Baby Hope's DNA profile.
So, Margarita, we took DNA samples that you gave us and we took them to the lab. And it came up with a match.
They showed her the proof.
And I was wondering...
And then finally, the sketch.
Do you...
Angelica.
She admitted that Baby Hope was her daughter, and her real name was Angelica Castillo.
And Angelica?
Angelica.
And I was so happy. 22 years later, now she's finally a person. She's identified. And now we can find out what really happened.
Her father.
From there, police were able to get Margarita's version of the story. And Margarita explained that they had come to the United States in the 80s illegally from Mexico. They were undocumented immigrants at the time.
She told detectives that she and her husband had a really nasty split, and he took her 2 daughters, Angelica and Maribel, to go live with him.
Where are they? Give me my...
And at that time, her husband, Gennaro, had gone to Astoria, Queens, to live with his brother's wife, Balvina.
Margarita told authorities that she had repeatedly gone there to try to visit them, but he wouldn't allow her to have any contact with them. And because of her relationship with Gennaro was very abusive, she felt really powerless to do anything.
Especially when Gennaro would threaten her or the girls with violence if she didn't back off.
If you come back again, I will kill you!
I will keep coming back!
So now you have this woman who's trapped. Her daughters have been taken from her. She's here illegally. She's terrified and didn't know where to turn.
Many years later, she said one of her daughters was returned to her, but not the other, and nobody told her what happened to Angelica.
Do you know where the father is right now?
No.
Margarita eventually heard that Gennaro had gone back to Mexico and said she believed that Angelica was with him, but she didn't know whether she was safe or not.
I couldn't go to the police because...
She feared that something terrible could have befallen her, but she felt powerless to go to authorities because she was an illegal immigrant. She had other children to take care of, and she couldn't take the risk of reporting a possible crime and being deported.
Baby Hope's mother says she still remembers thinking one day she'll find her daughter. Unable to hold back tears, Angelica's mother describes the moment she realized her daughter wasn't coming back.
When detectives got here and they showed me the pictures, that's where all the hope was lost. That one day my child would maybe turn up as a grown-up.
So now finally the public had Baby Hope's backstory, where she had come from, how she ended up here. But what the public didn't know was, how did she end up murdered? How did she end up in the cooler? Who was it who had dumped the cooler by the side of the Henry Hudson Parkway 22 years earlier? There were still so many questions that had not been answered in this case. But there was one person that investigators believed would have the answers: Angelica's father. And detectives knew who Angelica's father was, so now they needed to find him. But that proved a lot harder than expected.
Detectives found out that he had moved to Mexico, but they could not track him down anywhere. It was as though he had vanished.
Where are they?
But of course they weren't going to give up. They'd come this far.
Police found out that while Angelica was living in Balvina's apartment, there were other people living there as well.
And when they investigated, they found a monster hiding in plain sight. Investigators had just uncovered that Baby Hope's father didn't kill his child, but he probably knew who did.
Detectives found out that Angelica was living with the father, but at the time there was another adult male in the household living there, and his name was Conrado Juarez.
This was a bad guy. He had all sorts of charges of assault against him, some sexual in nature. He had a reputation as he's not the guy you want around your kids.
That, to me, I mean, obviously, the father was aware that a family member committed that crime, and he did nothing about it. I just have a hard time understanding this.
So if Conrado had been the one to kill Angelica, he should have been off the streets 22 years earlier. And now they needed to find him immediately.
They tracked him down at the Italian restaurant where he worked as a dishwasher and took him back to the police station for questioning.
Renata, do you know who murdered Angelica Castillo? You sure? I think you have to tell me. I would do it right now.
Para hacerle la verdad, señor. Por favor. Es para la muchacha. Sí. Y seguimos con la vida.
Angelica.
Le hablé y le digo, Ángel, le digo, ven para acá.
Okay. And did she agree?
Ella aceptó.
Sí.
Yes.
Okay.
Conrado said that on the night she was murdered, he was very drunk.
Entonces cuando pues el alcohol me hizo perder el control.
He told authorities that as he was trying to rape her, she began to struggle, and he put a pillow over her face and suffocated her.
And when he realized that she was dead, he called his sister for help.
What have you done? Are you crazy? Oh my God, why did you do this? Why? Okay, let me think about it.
Pues en ese momento, la hermana, hablé con ella y ella, la idea dice, pues ahorita dice, vamos a poner, dice, ahí te dice, tengo una hielera, entonces lo vamos a poner en la hielera, pero dice, el cuerpecito está, el cuerpo está grande.
And so they tied her up, they put her body in a plastic bag and put it in this dirty cooler. And he said he put soda cans on top, and she went and helped him get rid of the evidence.
And the fact that Conrado Juarez got another adult involved who was supposed to be her protector, who didn't help, didn't do anything to intervene, and together they disposed of her body, makes you question humanity, because how is it possible? How is it possible that you could get two people to do this together?
The remarkable thing is that after all these years, it turned out that that very first tip was true.
Conrado and Balbina were the two people responsible for carrying the cooler. The man and the female that were seen were now identified as them two.
What cops found out wasn't just that they were co-conspirators in Angelica's death, but that this was not the first time that she had been harmed by these two people.
Conrado also revealed they would often tie her to a desk or a table with rope, like an animal, so she couldn't go into the fridge, so she couldn't open the fridge to get food.
Gruesome details were learned about how she was starved, how she was mistreated. So not only did she not get to live out her life, the people who were supposed to be her protectors contributed to her death. That's the saddest part. She was not protected as she should have been. That was her right.
Good afternoon, NYPD detectives from the Bronx Violent Felony Squad apprehended Conrado Juarez, age 52, of the Bronx, in connection with the murder of 4-year-old Angelica Castillo.
Conrado Juarez was arraigned in Manhattan Criminal Court on October 12, 2013, on a charge of second-degree murder in the 1991 death of 4-year-old Angelica Castillo.
Unfortunately, his sister was never arrested because she died before we found out who was responsible for this.
There was at least some semblance that the city, which had become her de facto family, had gotten the closure it had been denied for 22 years.
And the detectives ultimately fulfilled their promise to Angelica to keep her memory alive and to eventually catch her killer. And they did.
How do I feel now? You know the expression, I'm on cloud 9? Well, that's where I am not right now.
I think I could sum up my feelings in 3 words. I'm very proud. I'm proud of this department. I'm proud of the detectives.
It was an honor to know that I was part of an elite group of people that could solve that case. And too many years went by.
I'm just glad that the person who did this was put to justice. But it doesn't change that she's not here, and she should be.
Who knows what she could have been? She could have had the cure for cancer one day. Her life just started, and that was taken away from her. But now she's not Baby Hope anymore. She's Angelica again. She was given a name from her birth. Maybe that's what she was. An angel.